And welcome in to another episode of the Q Crew here on the Tell Me More podcast. I'm your host, Mac Moore, and my guest today, Colin Wright. How's it going, Big Colin?
Good. Thanks for having me on. How's your summer going? I guess today's the first day of summer officially, so.
I don't know how any of that works. I will trust your judgment on that. I think it's summer as soon as it's hot. That's my ruling. Definitely been, what's weird is I think I went out, maybe it was Tuesday, and I think it was at least 80 degrees, but for some reason I remember checking and seeing it was 90, and I was like, this isn't that bad. This is fine. And then like the very next day, and it had to have been like the same degrees. I was still wearing the same, like it was cargo shorts and some sort of like button up, but like short sleeve, and I like for some reason was just sweating, dying. Like what happened? What changed? I don't know if it was just the humidity jump. I was like, I feel like I was okay yesterday. I don't know what happened. And it's going to be a long summer is what the long story short. Part of staying, cool during the summer though is stay inside, watch some movies, maybe watch some early release movies due to the movie theaters being shut down. And, have they opened back up yet? I feel like everything is going to crazy land in terms of what's allowed to happen right now. But I do know, at least at this point, movies like what we're talking about, King of Staten Island, they had already sold that kind of, looking for the fact that didn't know when movie theaters would open back up, made more sense to try to see what money they can get out of it. And they got $20 out of me, which I don't know how long of this podcast we want to spend complaining about the prices for the video on demand movies that have been thrown up for early access, but I'm not too happy.
There's almost never a time in my life I would spend $20 to watch a movie at home, but I'm so like starved for a new Hollywood movie because I haven't been to the theater in 3.5 months that I was like, oh, it's only $20. Let me go ahead and fork it over, which I did reluctantly, but I was anticipating for so long. I decided, well, let's do it. It's a Friday night. I'm just going to pretend like we're going to the movies to get some popcorn and I'm just going to hopefully enjoy it, which I did. So
the other thing for me is like Amazon has their like explanations for the rental. So I spend $18.99 or whatever it is. And like, I was hoping, okay, if that's $20, like give me some time to watch this. And I think initially it says like you have a week, whatever, to watch it. But obviously it has its kind of like, once you start it, you have X number of hours. When I clicked it, it said 48. Then once I got to the next screen of accepting and starting the movie, it said 24 hours. And I was just like, you guys are like, at this point, it's like, don't pause the movie or you will not get to see the end. It will cut off before you get to the finish. I get it. I understand kind of the business side of, just trying to limit that because honestly, I'm not going to complain, but definitely my first step was to look for ways to get the access to a few of the Q Crew. And I got a kitty trying to attack me right now. But, I think that it makes sense for them to do that. Once you get into I'm paying you $20, like that level of you have 24 hours to finish this film is like, nah, you better give me some time, bro, because that's more than a movie ticket, and you're giving me less of the experience. I paid for the TV and the couch and I guess I'm technically saving money because instead of buying some red vines and maybe a hot dog and who am I kidding? I go to McDonald's and bring the food in with me when I go to the movie. But, other people might have already spent more than $20 just on the rest of the accoutrement for the movie theater experience. I think that when you're at home and you're doing that, I know it's not going to be the $5 rental you get for the other movies that are on those streaming services. But once you're getting past $12 or $13, like if you're going to up it to that price, I better own the movie, which I feel like is what it was for the way back, which surprised me with King of Staten Island. I'll have to go double check, but I don't remember it telling me it was a 48-hour rental. It was like okay, this is go straight to DVD mode and pay $20. There were no options for $5 to rent. It was just buy the movie. I think that's a bad business model, and if it wasn't for how much I enjoy Pete Davidson and Judd Apatow movies, I wouldn't have paid it. But it's not even what you said with the needing to go to the theater. I don't have that like need. I didn't watch 30 movies before quarantine happened. I literally just did it for the people in the film, and otherwise it was like, oh, this isn't to keep. I'm out. That would have been my response if not wanting to do the podcast on this and wanting to talk about. Big fan of Pete Davidson, so had to do it. Had to spend the money.
Yeah, I was definitely annoyed at the price. And like what you were saying, I thought it was a bit high. I think 10 to 15 would have made more sense. But then when I realized you only had it for a day, I thought like I could like watch it like later on or share it with friends or send them the link. But no, it's like you have it, it's over the next day. It's like, okay, hopefully you enjoyed it. So yeah, I think that's not the best way to do it. I don't know. One of the things that I tried to check today, I don't know if you have seen any information, was like, I know it came out like June 12th, around a week ago. But have you seen any sort of like box office numbers or like how successful it was? I wasn't able to find any of that. I don't know how that works.
No, I haven't looked because I don't know if that's really something that's really discussed, and I doubt with a movie like this where it's experimental, they'll want to jump into the numbers too much. I didn't really look though, so it might be something that you can find if you know the right place to go searching on the internet, but. I don't think it really matters all that much. Like at this point, when your film was ready to go as a spring release or an early summer release, and you don't think there's going to be any movies at all, you kind of just have to recoup your losses. And I'm not sure what they had expected. They did seem Judd Apatow definitely did the new version of like the media campaign of going around to he was definitely on the ringer for like 6 different podcasts trying to sell this film and just kind of talk about his career. And sadly, I was like, these Judd Apatow interviews are not entertaining. Like I watched a lot with Pete Davidson, very good. Anytime I've like jumped in, even when they're not like these like groundbreaking interviews, there's usually some personality there. And I was just like, is this Judd Apatow always like talking with people? You would expect with the types of movies, the comedy, you'd expect him to be somebody who is either just great storyteller or extremely funny. And none of that showed through with the dozen podcasts I listened to him on. And, I know it's ironic me saying that as somebody who does a podcast all the time, and nobody would even think to watch it and even critique me on the fact that I'm a bad storyteller. But Judd Apatow, I imagine because of how much I enjoy his movies, there would be this kind of really great insight he'd have. And, he tried to talk about, the muse effect that he has kind of had with his films. He doesn't make them as fast as a lot of the other executive producers, a lot of the, in terms of director, I had to go back and look and see. It was like, oh, he doesn't actually direct a lot of these. He came on as a producer for a lot of them, sometimes a writer. But in terms of the ones he's directed, it's like it's only a handful of films. It's even going back to, I think, Knocked Up. It's like 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, then Funny People. This is 40.
Yeah.
Trainwreck. And then I think now King of Staten Island. He hasn't directed a film since Trainwreck, so a 5-year gap there. I didn't realize he had put that much time in between. So whenever he decides to do it, it's usually because he finds a comedian that he feels like is not a traditional lead in a Hollywood film, but he sees their potential and he wants to make a movie around them and, kind of facilitate that. And it makes a lot of sense when you look at just kind of what he did with Seth Rogen. And then Amy Schumer was another one that he felt like, okay, let's see what happens if we give her a big, comedy as opposed to being a side character. Pete Davidson, another one that is just young, talented, but even like he's a fish out of water on, his biggest accomplishment so far being on SNL at the age of 20. And one of the best jokes he gets for his stand-up is he doesn't know when he's going to get fired. So to find somebody like that has talent, is an extremely funny person, and to have that ability at that young age makes sense that Judd Apatow wants to jump in and help cultivate that. But I would have imagined when he's pitching that to me, I would have been sold on Pete Davidson had I not already been a Pete Davidson fan. If I was being sold just by Judd Apatow selling it, I wouldn't have watched this movie. And I'm not kidding when it was like a dozen podcasts. Like, bare minimum, I listened to 3 with Judd Apatow this week. If I wouldn't have already just wanted to see this film, wouldn't have been it.
Yeah, I did listen to one podcast that Apatow was on, just talking about a little bit about the movie and also just about his last few decades of his life in comedy, and how even as a young kid, like when he was in high school, he knew he wanted to go into comedy, and like he wanted to like kind of be an actor, comedian, which he has done, but very little. I think he learned early on that if he's on behind the scenes and he's doing some writing and producing and directing, that's what's going to lead him to the most success. And he's really been behind a lot of the main comedians that we know today. I know he was talking about living with Adam Sandler in the early 90s, and he knew Sandler was going to be big.
And Ben Stiller. Like, there's actually like videos of Adam Sandler and Ben Stiller like making prank phone calls while Judd Apatow is like filming in the background. And, obviously he understands comedy. I don't know if maybe it is because this movie is it's along the lines closer to what Funny People and This Is 40 is. It's less about that traditional comedy, or even, if you think of Judd Apatow's stuff in like Superbad, Knocked Up, where it took comedy a little bit dirtier, but even that kind of genre that maybe he created, it's a different film than these ones that feel a little bit more personal. So maybe when he goes on those media tours, he's trying to play it up, and maybe he's better at selling a comedy than he is a heartfelt tale, and maybe that's why I didn't connect to it as much as he's talking about it. But that said, I've really enjoyed those movies. Even, going back to Funny People, I think that was one that got some negative reviews, and I really enjoyed it. If you're it's tough because if you're judging it from a comedy perspective, it's not nearly as funny as some of his other films. And if you're judging it from this kind of like artistic art house type flick, he's not as polished making those films. But, there are movies, even one like The Big Sick that he, helped produce. That one kind of felt like it was a serious film that didn't lose out on any of the comedy. It was that perfect blend. And each of the films where Judd Apatow actually directs and tries to make that movie, they're kind of uneven. Like, one moment they're serious, then they jump to dick jokes. And King of Staten Island did that. And it's weird because I could see where somebody would watch Funny People, they'd watch This Is 40, and they'd watch King of Staten Island and walk away disappointed. And I still really enjoyed all 3 of those films. I loved the ability for them to do both. And while it didn't have whatever perfect blend kind of made the movie flow properly, I actually might like them more for how uneven they are. And this was one that, particularly towards the end of this film, I couldn't believe it got funnier. Like, normally comedies, they start strong and they kind of fade towards the end when they get into the actual plot. This was one that took so long on the plot, and then when they get to that last home run stretch, particularly Action Bronson's cameo that just killed me, nearly killed his character as well. I couldn't believe it was that funny at the end, and that, like, I think it took me half the movie to get sucked in the way that Funny People did for me, the way that This Is 40 did for me. King of Staten Island finally did it in the home stretch, and I was amazed that by the end of the movie, I only have positive things to say about it.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things I wanted to see with this movie, because I think you and I are familiar with Pete Davidson, and a lot of people are, because he's been on Saturday Night Live, I want to say like 4 or 5 years now. He's been doing it for a little while.
I think it's
Is
6
it 6
years now. Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it.
So Davidson doesn't have a big filmography of a bunch of movies he's been in, but he's very familiar because he'll show up on Weekend Update with Michael Che and Colin Jost as himself and talk about living with his mom in Staten Island. And so you already know a little bit about Pete. You know he was very young, one of the youngest to ever go on SNL. And he's in the sketches, obviously, and then he's obviously in the public eye with his relationship with Ariana Grande. So I was already a fan of Pete Davidson because I was like, okay, this guy makes me laugh. Like, I've seen his Netflix special. I was like, this guy, there's something about him. Like, I get it. There's some comedians, their sense of humor just doesn't like click. I'm just like, yeah, I get it, but it's like, it's not for me. But with Davidson, I've always been a fan. So I was looking forward to this movie. I wanted to laugh, which I did, but I didn't expect the characters to be as strong as they were. I thought one of the things that Apatow did really well was he made us care about the characters. I'll also give a big shout out. I thought the opening scene was great. Like, it's hard, I think, to open a movie, especially like when it's a comedy. Like, how do you spend your first 5 minutes? And it's Pete Davidson driving in the car, and you know right off the bat he's dealing with a lot of things. Just as he's like clenching the steering wheel, closing his eyes, and just like wanting something to change. And so right off the bat, I was like, okay, I get it. And so there wasn't a lot of like laugh out loud moments early on, but there didn't need to be because I wanted to care about the characters, and I did. And you know, going into it, I knew that Pete Davidson's dad died because he was a firefighter, like saving lives. And so the fact that they had that in the movie, and another nice touch that I really appreciated, I didn't know till the very end of the movie, Pete Davidson's character in the movie's name is Scott, and his dad's name in real life was Scott. And so I was like, okay, I like feel good moments. And so for me, that made me connect even more with the film.
Yeah, and I think that is an interesting part is I think he referred to it as like a 75% autobiography. Like, originally there is a part of this script that is Judd Apatow has. He brings it to Pete Davidson, and then as they're working on it, like, it was already meant to kind of reflect him a little bit, and then when they kind of work together as a duo to flesh it out a little bit more, then they just keep bringing in more and more bits of his life. Even the Crohn's disease part where, you know, he's ripping out the firefighters, and it's like, you didn't need to say that to him. It's like, you know, I'm trying to, you know, bring up public awareness, you know, and it's like, that's like a real thing. Like, he has it, and he talks about it openly, and like conversations where he's having a laugh with Charlemagne the God on the Breakfast Club, he is bringing up the fact that he has Crohn's disease, and then explaining it when they're like, well, what's this? And like, he goes through it, and he seems like casual about it. Like, it's not this like, it's this, like, he's like legitimately talking like, yeah, no, I'm perfectly comfortable telling you about what this is and what it does. And that's kind of the thing in the movie is he's been very comfortable talking about the fact that his dad died in 9/11 as a firefighter, and obviously they changed that little bit in the movie. His dad just dies trying to go into a particular fire where he was being a hero because that's what he does, you know, like that's the mindset he's always had. And that you know, change, it still was something he connected with. It was still made it easier for him to transition to be an actor in this film. And I don't know, there's something about you know, Funny People did the exact same thing. It was like, that was probably maybe 50% Adam Sandler, but even the parts that weren't, you kind of have this I always point to wrestling because it's like this kayfabe. It's the character you play as a wrestler. The character that Adam Sandler is, the character that Pete Davidson is, they are themselves on stage, but they're also a performer. And sometimes when they blur the lines, we don't know what's real. Like, we just know that, you know, this matches up their real story. And so you connect with the character that much more when you see the struggles that they're going through. And I think it was a smart idea for them to write the film the way they did, bring those parts in for Pete Davidson, because he did have just these moments that really connected. You know, I don't think it was a perfect acting performance from Pete Davidson. There were moments where it goes back to the way I kind of described Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems. There were just certain parts where it's like, okay, it's clear that the person opposite of him is a better actor. In this case, that happened a lot with Pete Davidson opposite of Marissa Tomei. Luckily, later on, he goes across for Bill Burr, which is somebody who isn't traditionally an actor, but has been doing it more and more in recent years. And he's already kind of gained that comfort. And Pete Davidson gets to work with that. He gets to see how actors like Marissa Tomei work. How does somebody like Judd Apatow work making this movie? And then how does somebody like Bill Burr, who, Pete Davidson has said multiple times, he'd love to have the career trajectory that a Bill Burr has. And so it's amazing to watch this film and see how good it already is, but to also know this is the beginning of it for Pete Davidson. This is, I think he did Big Time Adolescence, which I haven't watched yet, but he's just now kind of trying to see what he can do on the big screen. And Judd Apatow put him straight into the stratosphere, which is a lot of pressure. And if you think about it from that standard, I think without a doubt, this movie was so good that's crazy. This is one of his first, step up to the plate. Like, he hit a home run. Like, I can't wait to see what he does going forward, trying to bring that to the screen. Will he be as good when he doesn't play a role that is literally his life? That we'll have to see, but he definitely brought that to the table in this one. Was funny when he needed to be, was heartfelt when he needed to be, and by the time the movie was over, this was $20, and I was still telling all of our Q crew people, like, every day, "You're gonna watch it? You're gonna watch it? It's good. Watch it." Like, trying to push them, because I really do. I think this movie was good. Nothing's worth $20, but if there are movies being sold for $20, I'll pick this one over any of the other ones in the bunch.
Right. I feel like part of it was just, not having seen a new movie in a little while. But I really was, by the last 20 or 30 minutes, I was so sucked into the movie. And that's really all I can ask for. Like, there's certain movies, when the last 10 or 15 minutes come, I'm ready for it to be over so I can go on my evening. This one could have kept going. And I think that says a lot to how Davidson was really able to, like, I want to say take on a role. A lot of it was just him being himself, but also being comfortable enough with the camera. And you mentioned Marissa Tomei, like, his relationship with his mom, who, obviously, when you're a 24-year-old high school dropout that's unemployed, you might not have the best relationship with your mother. But we really see it get worse and worse as she begins to date not only a new guy for the first time in 15 or 20 years, but a firefighter, which is what her husband was, when he died, when Pete was just a little kid. And so you have this dynamic where Bill Burr comes in, which the fact that he shows up at the door because his son had a tattoo drawn on him when he's 9 years old, I thought was just fantastic, because it really was believable that Pete Davidson's character was dumb enough that if a little kid wanted a tattoo, he was like, well, he said he wanted it. So I thought that was nice. But I thought, there's a scene where Bill Burr's trying to be the cool new stepdad or potential stepdad, and he wants to take him to a Yankees game. But it turns out that it's a Staten Island Yankees game and not a New York Yankees game. And so they go with some other firefighters, and Davidson's character is just not interested at all and makes some comments. And I think that's kind of that's one of the strongest points, I thought, where Davidson really was like, just being honest about how, like, firefighters shouldn't have a family. And, like, who would blame him for feeling that way? If you're 6 or 7 years old and you lose your dad, like, he's obviously going to have really strong feelings. And so the movie takes a turn after that, obviously, when his mom kicks him out of the house, and he's like, he doesn't have anywhere to go. And so I struggled a little bit when he first showed up to the firehouse. I was like, that's a little too convenient. But then once they kind of are busting his balls a little bit, and they're not buddy all the time. Yep. They're like, here's the couch, but hey, this is a serious thing. Go clean the toilet. I thought, like, okay, like, I didn't know what was going to happen there, but I wanted something to happen where you see Davidson's character finally mature a little bit. And I thought it was there, at least enough for me to appreciate what was going on.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that was hard to believe about that setup, because it does seem kind of this kind of cliched, like, oh, he's just going to become a fireman, like the only part I didn't find believable is him going in the first place. It's like him asking for that. But once he asks, like, he's the son of a firefighter who died in the line of duty. It seemed to make sense that everybody but Bill Burr's character would be on board with letting him stay there. And then, yeah, that was it was a little uneven. It was a little awkward during that phase. But honestly, by the time they get to Action Bronson, I just like, this worked. It shouldn't have worked. This shouldn't have been how you redeem it, but they were smart enough not to go the full firefighter route. He is staying there, and then in that time kind of resets his focus on becoming a tattoo artist and what it takes. Still can't get the eyes right, but just maybe if he just didn't do Obama tattoos, he'd be fine with it. The other ones, like, they don't look as bad, but yeah, definitely can't do Obama with the really poorly drawn eyes. But I think that scenario all started to work, and then I had basically forgot that we needed to get these resolved tensions as Action Bronson walks on screen with some sort of wound, maybe a gunshot, maybe a knife. We still don't know to this point. But God, at this point, I don't plan on ripping off any topics from other podcasts, but if I was going to, it'd be the Dion Waiters Award from the Rewatchables podcast on The Ringer, who came in with very little role in the movie and, like, just killed. It's Action Bronson, and he's done it twice. He's probably the best part of The Irishman, which I have a lot lower reviews on The Irishman than a lot of other people do. He's had 2 of these cameos in pretty big films. These aren't just randomly, like, ones he got thrown into. And he can hold his own with some of the best comedians in the game. I couldn't believe how good that scene was. By the time it was done, like, I'm laughing while they're at the firehouse and he's explaining why you can't call the ambulance. When they're in the hospital, when you get Bill Burr actually showing up to help him get him through there. Like, every moment, Action Bronson one-upped it, which part of it's the writers, great writers, but he delivered every line so good. I was dead. I like, from that moment, anything I thought about critiquing of the film, I was like, never mind. This is a great film and everybody should watch it.
Yeah, I thought Pete Davidson's character had some good moments. I don't know if he necessarily needed a hero moment, but I think that was it. When Bronson shows up and he's wounded and bleeding like a lot, and Pete Davidson realizes he's the only one there because everyone else is attending to obviously putting out a fire, and so he's like, okay, this is my moment, and it is really good. It's great to see him, like, do what I think someone would do, because he's asking the right questions, like, did you get shot? Did you get stabbed? And he's not answering him, but they rush to the hospital, and we really see, like, those characters, like, just be alive and real. And I don't know. I thought that was Davidson's hero moment. I don't know if he needed it, but I liked it. I thought it was perfect how it worked out, because he was in the right place at the right time, and he's able to help someone. So obviously not on the level of, like, what his dad did in the line of duty, but he was there and he was able to help out, and so props to him for that. But I did enjoy a good laugh there for a few minutes.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed the gang that he hangs out with, his group of friends that are clearly just supposed to be, like, the standard Staten Island people, that it's like, why are you friends with these people? But, at first it's just like, well, they're a little quirky, but they're fine. It's like, is any of his friends worse than him when he draws a tattoo on an 8-year-old? So it's like, well, okay, this is a decent friend group for him. And then when they try to convince him to rob the pharmacy, and that scene was another one that was like, this is a turn for something more serious than the film is going for. And that might be the one that is well blended of serious while also the funniest thing I've ever seen. Like, when he's sitting there, like, trying to call them, and, like, he calls each one, so all of their ringtones are getting off and they're getting shots fired at them. And it's just like the calmness of all of the people who are, like, actually trying to rob the pharmacy while he's freaking out on the outside just as the lookout. Like, what why aren't they answering? And he just keeps calling, and you're just like, he's leaving voicemails, and you're like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? But like that moment, I was just like, okay, if the whole movie felt like that 5-minute span, like, or the last 5 minutes when Action Bronson, there are moments of clarity in Judd Apatow's filmmaking, you know, and I think I would criticize the fact that the whole movie isn't like that, except I've seen him do it. I've seen him make movies like 40-Year-Old Virgin, like Knocked Up, that are so perfect. They from beginning to end, they move along, and he gets in the funny moments when he wants to. He gets in the heartfelt moments, and I can't criticize him because I know he's not aiming for that. Like it to say that that's what the movie needs. He wants to sit in the character's just personality for a while. Like he wants you to be there seeing who they are in situations that aren't hysterical, aren't fast paced, and those are important moments, you know, like even the times where he's you know, sitting there with his friends in the basement and they're just cracking off these jokes. Those, some of the jokes were really funny, some of them were just kind of like friend banter. And Judd Apatow isn't trying to judge the movie based on, okay, we need to get in one more quip, you know. He's taking his time on those moments, and somebody might be able to critique his ability and say, okay, he's not the most polished filmmaker, but I think he does a good enough job and finds the right people to put into his movies, such as Pete Davidson, that I do want to sit there in those moments and kind of see how Pete Davidson reacts to the mundane things as much as he reacts to a guy bleeding and needing you to take him to the hospital. Like, I feel like those other moments are just as important, and it's weird because I know, like, I could understand where somebody would critique it, but I feel like those are some of the best parts of the movie. Like, they're not something on a checklist that you'd be like, oh, let's get rid of that. They're very important to the story that Judd Apatow tells, and that type of movie, which I put into the category along with Funny People and This Is 40, where it is just, maybe a little less on This Is 40, but definitely on Funny People. He's aiming for a different kind of movie. Maybe he failed, but I really enjoyed both of them.
Yeah, I think that I know I haven't seen every movie that Apatow has ever touched, but I've seen the majority, and I'm rarely ever disappointed because I think one of the things that he does well is he gets the best out of the actors, out of the actresses, out of the crew that's there making the movie. But one of the things I think I appreciate the most is it was funny in the podcast I was listening to, Apatow was talking about how he was struggling with the beginning of this movie, The King of Staten Island. And he said that the scene that I mentioned earlier with Pete Davidson driving in the car, he said that was 20 minutes into the movie. And then in post-production, he couldn't figure out how to start the movie. And he actually, his wife, Leslie Mann, said, why don't you do the scene of him driving at the beginning? And so he switches it around, and he's like, oh, I'm going to prove her wrong. I'm going to put that scene at the beginning just to prove her that this doesn't work. And then he did it and realized it's actually the perfect scene. But I think that Apatow is so involved from the beginning of writing the script to post-production to everything that he just really has a clear vision. And I'm a big fan. Like, I know that I laugh a lot, and I'm not that hard to please when it comes to comedies. But if I'm going to laugh and also care about the characters at the same time, obviously you're doing something right. So I think The King of Staten Island had a lot of strengths, but I really thought that Apatow didn't miss many beats at all. So that's some of the highest praise I can give it, but I really was a big fan.
Yeah, and I like how it's managing multiple ecosystems in one film. You know, it's like, here is this character that Pete Davidson is playing with, you know, his mom and his sister. Are dealing with a tragedy that is affecting them, you know, a decade after it's happened. Like, this is a long time of it's a life-changing moment that they're not able to quite get past. You have him with his group of friends that they have their own dynamic, and he's not the only one who has things he needs to get through. You know, if you were to pick somebody in the group, I forget the little guy's name, but obviously he's catches a little bit more shit than Pete Davidson character does. Like that's there is those type of dynamics when he goes and becomes the waiter, and each one doesn't feel just kind of slapped together. Each one feels fully fleshed out, even for characters you don't see that long. When they go to the graduation party and you have, which I actually think it is Pete Davidson's uncle that is sitting there talking about, like, you don't need to go to college, and then like he talks to the sister. He's like, no, you definitely should go to college. And it's just like that. Such a funny guy, and part of it is, once again, that organic, that real feel, because it is Pete Davidson's uncle, but also they made this fully fleshed out scene that added to the characters when Pete Davidson goes in and tries to score weed off of the waiter that's in there, and he just casually asks for it. I forget the guy's name, but he's just like, good on you, Scott, or whatever the hell it is. It's not Scott, because Scott's the actual name of Pete Davidson's character. But whatever name, he just says it and has this cool little interaction. And these are scenes that in other movies would just kind of be throwaway. They wouldn't be used in a way that really helps you understand the character, that helps move things along, and just happen to be really funny. When Pete Davidson gets knocked out as a waiter because they're fighting over tips, and when he later uses that as, okay, here's how I'm going to take out my frustration about this guy who's seeing my mom, and he's finally in there. He was not sure about this little game, putting on the whole cans and punching each other. He's like, nope, now I got frustration, and boom, one hit, Pete Davidson's still out. Didn't matter how upset he was. Wasn't going to help him in fighting. He can't fight. I think those little moments that otherwise you see them a lot in movies that, and they'll still get the laugh, but I don't think they get that connection with the character the same way. Judd Apatow really makes sure that those moments work and they're not wasted. They're not something that could just as easily be left on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, and with movies like this, like, you never quite know how it's going to end, because you have lots of things happening during the movie, and obviously a lot of the tension between, Pete Davidson's character and his relationship with his mom, and like how that is kind of a struggle throughout the whole film. And then I like how at the end of it, it's not like we have Davidson get his dream job or move out to a nice apartment. Like, none of that happens. He just comes to a realization that, like, he can strive towards something. He can overcome slowly some of these challenges that he's been facing for the last couple of decades of his life, growing up in a single parent home, and having a little sister that's a lot more successful than he is in a lot of ways, and going off to college and working towards a degree. But he does have moments with the girl that he's, how should I say, intimate with during the movie. He's afraid
his girlfriend by the end.
Yeah, he's afraid of commitment. He tells her, like, oh, you wouldn't want to date me. Like, no, you're too good for me. And by the end of it, he realizes that, like, you know what? Maybe he is mature enough that, like, I can call her my girlfriend. I can spend time with her. Like, I want to prioritize her, And so I thought that was enough for me to see the growth, the character development of, like, he doesn't have everything figured out, but he does know there's a girl he cares about, and he's going to go out of his way to do something for her. And so, like, you don't have to have a fancy last 10 or 15 minutes of everything going well. You just have to have a little bit of, like, he gets it, and things are going a little bit better than they were at the beginning.
You don't need the bow on the film? You don't need the bow on at the end?
I don't. No. I know some people do, but
yeah, I don't either. And it's funny. I don't know if the wife had looked away. Sometimes she'll pay attention to parts of movies and doesn't pay attention to all of it. But she gets very upset when there's not a bow on at the end. But I don't know if she just didn't watch it or didn't get as upset by this one. But yeah, it was definitely the moment I thought of it. And I think the first review I read, like, talked about how it's like a cop-out ending. It's like, no, it's not. Like, they gave you that full scene that told you where the character is going, and anything that's more than that is basically a lie. Like, unless you want every movie to end with a 4-year jump to when they're successful, it's like the guy who is 24 and tattooing an 8-year-old is not getting his life together in a month. Like, it's going to take a bit. Back off a bit. Like, if you want to retain that sense of reality, which I think is probably the thing that is 100% great about Judd Apatow movies that's hard to really take away from. He does have that sense of realness to these characters that even at the expense of being a more polished film, he would rather land, or even just a more polished comedy sometimes, he'd rather land to, I'm going to make sure that these characters still seem real. I'm not going to take a shortcut to get to a better film or a better comedy, a better joke. I'm going to let them be who they are. And in this case, I thought it was a perfect ending. I thought it even felt like the timing was right with how it went down. Like I said, if there were any issues, it was in terms of how the relationship built up with his mom and Bill Burr's character as this firefighter that comes in and courts his mom. It went a little too fast in terms of their connection. They just kind of jump scenes, which I get. You know, there's so many other things that we're focused on, and you just kind of had to accept the thing that is told when he's talking with his mom later. It's like, well, you have a type, don't you? You know, and it's like that had to explain it because the rest of it just wasn't there. And I don't know how much is the other joke that just kept coming up. It's like, he's got to shave the mustache. You know, it's like maybe that was part of it too. It's like she really just fell in love with the guy, not just that only met you to yell at your son for tattooing his younger son. It's he comes in like that and like it just immediately goes well, which I thought the first scene they had with them worked, but it just needed a little bit more for me to believe that they got to the point where that was a relationship where she's siding with the boyfriend about needing to have her son move on. You know, it's now time for him to move out at 24. It's like, I think that bond would have been too tight for it to have moved that quickly, you know. But other than that, really good. And I also, you know, I was talking about the different ecosystems, the different groups. Just Pete Davidson interacting with the kids, walking them to school. It's like, these are such, you know, you could convince me that they're a little too corny with the way he's mentoring the young kid who wants to, you know, make comic books and make these superheroes. But definitely the entertainment value, and that goes back to Pete Davidson's personality being just something that kind of jumps off the screen at you. His interactions with those kids, I think you could write a lot of lines that might work, but the lines aren't what make it work. It's like the sound of his voice, the delivery, like he interacts with those kids in a way that maybe it's just because you haven't seen it before, but the attitude he takes while like helping these kids, but also it's like as a parent, you'd still be like, I don't want him to be there with my child, you know. It's just really funny to watch it happen, and it's just heartfelt enough, just funny enough. It gets that blend that, you know, really works. I think even more so than what Judd Apatow is aiming for as a director. I think it's Pete Davidson delivering that because he just has that personality. Same thing when he's talking with the waiter about trying to score the weed. It's just there is that just coolness to him, which is a juxtaposition that is interesting. So much of the character and so much of who Pete Davidson is in real life is the insecurities he has, the fears, the anxiety, and to, you know, it's weird because he's not masking those with coolness. That is who he is. It's just both things are true about it. He is calm and relaxed about things. He does want to have a low profile. At the same time, internally, he is super freaked out about a lot of things. So he's not just putting on a performance for other people. Both things about him are true. They're real. And they just surprise us because they seem to be in contradiction when that's just who he is as a person.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned, you know, the part where he would walk the kids to school, because the first time he does it, he's super uncomfortable and like is so like weird about it. And then he realizes it's not that hard to entertain an 8-year-old. And so a couple weeks go by and they're just casually hanging out, laughing, and he's asking questions and the girl's singing and the boy shows his drawings that he's made. And like, it's really cool to see Davidson's character just realize that, like, you know what? I'm not working. It's 8 a.m. Like, work schedules are crazy. Yeah, I can walk your kids to school. Like, I can do you a favor, you know? So I thought that, you know, that those scenes were really great and powerful. And I thought that showed a lot towards Davidson's character development. I think the other thing that we got out of this movie that we don't always get when someone's character had lost a parent at a young age was when he's hanging out with the firefighters, he gets to learn a little bit about his dad, and knowing that obviously no parent is perfect, but when you lose a parent when you're a kid, when you're 8, 9, 10 years old, you just think that, oh, my dad was a hero, he was perfect. Well, you don't have to be perfect to be a hero. And he learns about his dad, going out late drinking, maybe doing a little coke, and just a little bit
I think it was a maybe. I think it was confirmed.
And so I thought, because he's not a kid anymore. He's 24. He's still living at home, and maybe he was a high school dropout, but he's learning things about his dad that make his dad more real and provide a little bit, I hate the word closure, but just a little bit more understanding of what his dad went through as a firefighter. And so I thought that was really cool, getting to gain that information, because we don't always get that. When we learn about someone's parents that died, we don't ever always get the truth and some of the other behind the scenes. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, and that's a big part of his stand-up act as well, is kind of talking about the idea that, it wasn't even that he just believed his dad was this hero. Like, I think he even says it in the movie at some point that it's, it's like, no, I'm not an idiot. And I think during like maybe the graduation scene, he says something along the lines where he's like, your dad wanted you to do this. Like, really? He told you that when I was 7? Like he said that before he died. When did he say it? Did you talk with him after the fire? And like that sort of like dark humor that otherwise would get brushed off. But in this case, you can't just be mad at him for being an asshole, because one, he says it with a smile on his face, and then two, his dad actually went through that. It's like, you don't get to be the one that tells him how to grieve, and it's interesting how that plays up. But having kind of that knowledge that, okay, there's no way my dad was perfect, but nobody's willing to tell him. And it took the group of firefighters that, Bill Burr's character is like trying to be like, no, don't tell him. And then all the other ones are like, let's do that. It's like, we have some good stories for the kid.
Yeah, I'm excited to see, Davidson in some more movies, because I think that he's only going to get better. And I think that obviously, I don't think it was too difficult for him to play himself, but also had to be a lot of emotions, playing something and having a character that's so real to what you are. But I am excited over, the next few years, what he decides to do, because obviously he has the talent. If he ever does get fired from SNL, his career will not be over, because he'll be able to, entertain us somehow.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what he does for a movie, because I mean, even if it's over, like, he's built the kind of stand-up career, and thanks to Ariana Grande, he's a household name, so he can definitely go off that for as long as he wants to. But in terms of the movies, this is definitely, it's an amazing start, and I think Judd Apatow talked about that a little bit in the different podcasts and media interviews he had, was just that a lot of these guys, maybe they get the movie and they're like 10 years in, it's like they're lucky to get their break. And that's, part of why he keeps looking for these kind of younger prodigies and giving them, the spotlight, is that, it took him a long time. And even as he's getting some breaks by being right there alongside Ben Stiller, seeing what Adam Sandler is able to do, it's like, it took these guys a while, and like Adam Sandler had to make a full career before he started eventually getting roles that allowed him to branch out into acting more than just being a funny guy in a film. And when you look at Pete Davidson getting that as early as he did, like it can be more pressure. It could be, okay, people are going to judge you on the same level as anybody else who would get to be the lead in a big budget comedy that has Judd Apatow's name attached. But at the same time, he does get to learn in this big moment. He gets to be there on set, seeing how this is done right. Not just how it's done, but how it's done right, how it's done really well. And that experience, you have to imagine, if this is what he wants to do, he's going to get better. He's already, in this role. I don't think anybody who's not an asshole could have blamed him if this movie didn't work out great, like if he had a subpar performance, because it is something that he hasn't done for a very long time. And, being put into this role, there are people that have done this all their life. That's all they've wanted to do. And you can have bad performances. A lot of pressure here. He did so well that I'm impressed with it. I'm ready to watch whatever he does next. If I wasn't so busy with all the other stuff I was doing, I would have already thrown on Big Time Adolescence. That might be what I do when we finish up this podcast. But he doesn't even need to do that, because I'll probably watch every stand-up special he ever puts out. I think it's a good time. Will it be as funny when there's no more Ariana Grande breakup jokes? Maybe not, but those were really good. And, those little moments that, I'm not sure anybody else can tell the joke the way Pete Davidson does. There's just, at this point, he's still learning the craft of both, stand-up, because stand-up takes a really long time to just become a master of the craft, and then to learn how to do it in, whether it's sketch comedy, whether it's in a feature film. These are things he's still learning, but he's already ahead of the curve. And I think as that goes along, I'm super excited for both the stand-up and what he can do on the big screen or even on TV. We'll see if they throw him into a role on a TV show at some point in time. The sky's the limit for Pete Davidson.
Yeah, and I think maybe even a tattoo artist. Not quite.
No.
That was fun to see some of the tattoos, though.
That was also a good reality check for anybody who thinks they can be a tattoo artist. It's like,
right.
It's very hard. You have to pay your dues. And even if you are good, you can be a talented artist. And it's not the same when it's a needle putting it onto somebody's body permanently. No erasers here. You can't just kind of, get rid of it and start over. You can't fix Obama's eyes in post. You got to get it right the first time. And that is a crazy thing that I've always, when I ever stopped to think about it, I was just like, man, who would ever let their friends tattoo them? Because it doesn't seem like it works out that well.
Right.
So in this movie, what is your favorite joke? Because for me, I think, I don't know if it's a particular joke, but just the scene of Action Bronson definitely was the home run for me. Although there were so many other great moments before that. But what's kind of either the scene or the punchline that stuck with you the most?
I guess the one that kind of stood out the most was just when he's hanging out with his friends in the basement, and he's like, when he's able to joke about his own dad dying. Like, I know it sounds bad, but I guess he's able to. It's been long enough, or he's just so disconnected, or so struggling with so many things. I don't know what he's going through, but when he's able to laugh about it himself and pretend to be offended, but then laugh along with it, I don't know. I thought that was good, just because the movie talks about it so much. So I thought when he's able to join in on the jokes about his dad dying, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I think each time he tells that type of dark humor, part of it is he's not making fun of, either his dad or the experience he had. It is a form of therapy, is the way that he views comedy. And so part of it is just kind of if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And also, if you took it so seriously that anytime somebody brought it up, he's already dealing with enough emotions. He doesn't need ones baked into normal responses people have to him when they find out that his dad died that way, and whether it's a defense mechanism or it is just a better way to live life. It's just, in terms of your mental health, that is a better way to, receive those conversations. It is interesting that, one, he thinks of it that way, and then two, that he just has that masterful timing to make it funny. Because, the same person or a different person can say the same jokes and it not work. It's like it takes a certain personality, a certain charisma to pull it off. And even then, in the movie, there are still people staring at him. And I don't think that's something that's just for the film. I think in real life, there are times there are people who try to watch his stand-up, and they're like, what the hell is this? And every time I watch it, I just think it's the funniest thing in the world. And I love the fact that he can talk about that. He finds a way to make the jokes more impactful the same way this movie did, digging into the pain that he feels, the insecurities that he feels, and finding a way to work through those and also get a good laugh out of it when he can. So
yeah, and going back to some of his even like some of his monologues on Saturday Night Live, like it's not necessarily what he's saying in the content, it's the delivery. He has this skill where he's able to say something and just pause at the right moments and use the right tone. But like I'm with you. I think it's very, very funny, and he's one of the best in the business. I really feel that way.
Yeah, he's got this thing where it's almost a deadpan, but he has the emotion too. Like he has this jitteriness that the fact that he can do both, he can hit you with that same feeling you'd get from somebody who delivers it with zero emotion, but he does it with this tiny bit of either anxiety or glee, and it just like oscillates between the two, and you're just like, you don't know how to feel. And maybe if you were in the room being the one who has to be hit with the joke while he's talking about it, you might have a weirder reaction because you're like, what am I supposed to do? When he's talking about his dead dad, what is my emotional response supposed to be? As opposed to watching him do it to other people and you're laughing with him as he is telling these jokes that are not getting a positive response from the crowd he's talking to. So I think that's always there too, is it's one thing that he can get a room to laugh. It's another thing that the moments that would be considered bombing, I'm also right there with him loving those moments. And so he can't really fail because at the end of the day, those moments are just as much about his star power when he can make a bunch of normies not understand what he's talking about and they're not willing to laugh at it, but it's fucking hilarious. I want to do a little bit with Judd Apatow. We talked about it. You know, I compared it to Funny People. If you were to do a list, I still, in this moment, haven't decided if we're just going to go with movies he's directed. I'm trying to look because the ones he did but didn't direct. So Heavyweights, first movie that he was a producer and a writer on. Fun with Dick and Jane was one he was just a writer. Walk Hard, Dewey Cox Story, producer and writer, but didn't direct. Wrote You Don't Mess with the Zohan, didn't direct Pineapple Express, but was a producer, and it just says writer story. Doesn't, so I think that was one that he had helped workshop later, but originally I think it was just another one of those movies that was in Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg's pocket, just waiting. And then he didn't write Trainwreck, but he directed and produced it. So I think I'm going to keep with directed because I don't even want to figure out where Heavyweights go. It's just a different era. There's a 10-year gap between a movie he was, actually very important on, and some people didn't like Heavyweights. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it was a good time. That Ben Stiller character we see recycled into Dodgeball, and it was perfect. But in terms of the movies he directed, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Knocked Up, Funny People, This Is 40, Trainwreck, King of Staten Island. Let's go down the list. Let's figure out which one you enjoyed the most. Do you want to go from the top or the bottom? Which is easier?
I'll start from the top.
Okay.
For me, number one, I would say Knocked Up. I think there's a lot of elements in there. I'm a big Seth Rogen fan, but I think, including Paul Rudd and Leslie Mann, and then you have I just thought Rogen was great in that role. I would put right behind that 40-Year-Old Virgin, just because Steve Carell is able to make me so uncomfortable watching him, and that's a compliment. Yeah. And then right after 40-Year-Old Virgin, I'd probably go to Funny People and then The King of Staten Island. I would say I would even put in the top 4, right behind those 3.
Okay, so we just have the 2 left there. This is 40 Trainwreck. Which one is not making the top 5
Uh,
list?
I'll do This Is 40 at number 5 just because LeBron James is in Trainwreck.
God.
Just for you, Mac.
You're so bitter, man. So bitter. All right, number 1 on my list, Trainwreck, because LeBron James is it. No. Yeah, I'd probably have to agree with you. I'll go Knocked Up, number 1. This is tough. I'm going to go Funny People. As much as I think on first view, 40-Year-Old Virgin was right up there as just this, great comedy of the 2000s. I think a lot of it still holds up, but also a lot of it doesn't. If I was to pick, I'm still putting that right there in third place. And then I'm going – this is tough. I am going to put Trainwreck right there, then King of Staten Island, just because I really did enjoy King of Staten Island, but Trainwreck was it was as flawless as Knocked Up, but also about, almost a decade after this film is already we know what goes into a Judd Apatow comedy at that point. So it's not as impressive that they did it as well as they did, but it's still amazing because you can't guarantee a movie, meets that criteria. Even when you get the right actors involved, you have the right script, things just sometimes don't pan out in comedies. It could be just a little bit off. So when you pull it off, I got to give you credit, but I'm, going to move it a little bit down the list. And then This Is 40 is weird because it's like, if this is like barely making it at the end, still really, really good. Like there were parts of that film that I think are important. One of the ones I know Judd Apatow always touts is kind of that it was like the first time in a movie you have like a person in a family, a dad, trying to get away from the family by like hiding in the bathroom with his, whether it's a phone or an iPad. And it's just kind of like this idea that now is just life. Like this is all we do is we, even if we're not necessarily hiding, we are constantly just wherever we are like, I'm not bored. I have my phone here. And there are just those certain moments. I think maybe This Is 40 tried a little too hard to be like, this is how I feel at this age. And it tried to do something that should have made it timeless, and instead it aged very quickly, But it was still good. I still enjoyed This Is 40 on the first watch. Even when I thought about going back to rewatch it, I'm like, it wasn't that good. I'm not quite ready for it.
Yeah, I did enjoy This Is 40, but I agree the rewatchability isn't there like some of Apatow's films are. And I know I made the LeBron joke, but I actually did enjoy Trainwreck. And I'm not a huge Amy Schumer fan, but I think this is a compliment to Judd Apatow. I thought her character was great in that movie, and throughout the movie, I was really drawn in. So yeah, I think that I hope Apatow directs more movies in the next decade because I really think that he finds comics who you talked about earlier, but they're not always going to be like characters that are playing a main role, but he puts them in a main role, and a lot of times they excel, which is fun to watch.
Yeah, and it's just amazing stuff he can do, which also now I'm looking on here. Okay, there's a whole separate list of just producer. So it's good we just did director. I don't know why they had it separate. Maybe it's because he was also a writer on some of these, so they put it in a separate category in Wikipedia. So as a producer, starts out with Crossing the Bridge. I don't know what the hell that is. Cable Guy. Then producer on Anchorman, Talladega Nights, Superbad, Drill Bit Taylor, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Step Brothers. Then it starts to get a little iffy. Year One, Get Him to the Greek. But then Bridesmaids. Wanderlust was okay. 5 Year Engagement was one of the ones, if you like rom-coms, it was really good and nobody really watched it. I don't even know what Begin Again is, but then they do Anchorman 2. He does Pee-wee's Big Holiday, Pop Star, which is one that I almost wanted to watch at one point during the seeing the trailers. I'm like, I love Lonely Island. I could do this. And then by the time it actually came out, I'm like, I'm not going to the movie theater to watch it. Then by the time it was on a streaming platform. I was like, I think at first it was like to rent for $5. I'm not paying $5 for that. And then by the time I it has to be available somewhere for free, and by free I mean just part of a subscription I already have, but just hasn't happened. It will happen at some point. Big Sick was one that was, because it was an Amazon original. Amazon needs to do a better job of selling me on things, because I see a lot of the stuff. I'm like, I don't really care to watch an Amazon original. And then there's stuff like The Big Sick that once I watch it, I'm like, no, this was as good as people said when they told me to watch it. And I think when you see that ability to find comics that do have that upside and can, once again, Big Sick, tell the story that is them, it is interesting to see how that might be the best way to bridge the gap for a comedian to get into a feature film, because there's a less acting. You still have to figure out the craft, and stand-ups love learning the craft of something. They just kind of need, good teachers and be in the right position to do it. But it's the easiest transition. And if they can do that right, then it's interesting to see, okay, what can they do from here? It will be interesting to see for Pete Davidson. It will be interesting to see for I'm not even going to say his name wrong, because I don't know how to Camille
Nanjiani.
Yeah. So thank you for saving me. He's amazing. Big Sick is a great movie. I love him in Silicon Valley. Every time he pops up, I think he had a bit role in Community where he was one of the janitors. That was I think he's like vice janitor or something. Some ridiculous. There was a title that it had to be. But like, no, it is interesting to see what happens when you kind of add a level of prestige to comedy and to the comedians that want to play those roles. They're not looked down upon when Judd Apatow is the producer. He makes sure that they can be elevated, and at least, even if the people who are the movie-going audience won't necessarily take it seriously or take it as seriously as they should, he will take it seriously in how the film is made. And that has helped make comedies much stronger than they've been. I know it feels like we're on kind of a 10-year gap of, since the comedy boom of the aughts. But I do feel like the ones now are still so polished that once you get one that's like The Big Sick or like Trainwreck or like King of Staten Island, I love when a good movie isn't held down by the lower production value because, we just had to do it this way because it's a comedy. Judd Apatow makes sure that these are done with good filmmakers, good cinematographers, and that if the movie doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it's not going to, you're not going to look back on it in 5 years and be like, why did they shoot this on such a shitty camera? Why did they not take the time to, make this a little bit more slick? I'm glad that Judd Apatow has brought that standard to comedy, and, we'll see if it continues to be that way going forward.
Yeah, and I think that, I know we joked earlier about the $20 we had to spend on it. I heard maybe in a month or two it'll be on Redbox. So you guys can go check it out for like $1.49 instead of the $20 that we forked over for it.
Hey, we forked it over to be cooler and to be able to have this great topic to talk about. And I'm glad we did. And we've almost wrapped up for this podcast. Anything else about King of Staten Island, about Pete Davidson, Judd Apatow, anything that you want to talk about before we get on out of here?
No, the last thing I'll say is Judd Apatow has a really, really, really impressive resume, as a filmmaker, writer, producer, director, and this is up there with what he's done in the past, and that's a big compliment. So I think he's still killing it, and it's definitely worth your time.
All right, that's a good pitch, and I concur. I think this is I would never convince somebody they have to pay $20, but I was not disappointed in spending the $20. Only disappointed seeing it and hitting the button. Not disappointed after watching the film, but watch King of Staten Island whenever you can, however you can. Steal it if you have to. I didn't block the mic like I was supposed to there. I actually made it louder to say it in there. So this will be the last podcast after the FCC and whatever big film companies come to shut me down. But thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Q Crew on the Tell Me More podcast. Later, folks.